You're standing on London Bridge at sunrise in 1665. The river below you is so crowded with boats you could almost walk across their decks to the opposite bank. Hundreds of them, thousands maybe, and every single one is carrying something this city needs to survive today. Not tomorrow, today. Because if these boats stop moving, London starves by nightfall. This is a city of 500,000 people living on an island with no railroads, no trucks, no refrigeration, and no supply chains that extend beyond what a horse can pull in a single day. And yet somehow it works. Somehow every morning the city wakes up fed. London in the 1600s isn't just big, it's unnaturally big for its time. Paris has maybe 400,000 people. Amsterdam, 200,000. Most European cities top out at 50 or 60,000 because that's the limit of what pre-industrial logistics can sustain. But London kept growing anyway, swelling past every reasonable boundary, and the whole system should have collapsed under its own weight. It didn't. And the reason why is written into every street, every wharf, every market that we're about to walk through. The Thames isn't just a river here, it's the circulatory system. Every ton of grain, every barrel of salted fish, every cask of ale moves on water before it moves on land. The roads are too narrow, too muddy, too slow. A wagon can carry maybe a ton if the horse is strong and the road is dry. A river barge can carry 20 tons, 30 if the current is favorable. So the city arranged itself around the only transportation network that could handle its appetite. We're moving downriver now, past the Tower of London, into the dense thicket of wharves that line both banks. This is where the food enters the city. Not through gates, not over bridges, through wooden piers that jut into the current like fingers reaching for the source. Billingsgate is directly ahead. It's the largest fish market in England, and it's been here for centuries. But in the 1600s, it's operating at a scale that would have been unimaginable a generation earlier. Every dawn, fishing boats from the North Sea unload cod, herring, oysters, eels. The smell hits you before you see the stalls. Salt and brine and the faint rot of fish that didn't sell yesterday. But here's what's easy to miss. These boats didn't just arrive this morning. They've been arriving in coordinated waves for hours, timed to the tide, because the Thames is tidal this far inland. Miss the tide and you're stuck in the mud until the water rises again. So the fishmongers, the boat crews, the market vendors, they all operate on a schedule dictated by the moon. Not by clocks, not by convenience, by celestial mechanics that no one can control but everyone has learned to read. It's easy to forget how fragile this is. One bad winter where the river freezes over and the whole system seizes. It happened in 1608. The Thames turned solid enough to hold frost fairs on the ice, and Londoners roasted oxen over bonfires in the middle of the river. It sounds festive until you realize that for the weeks the ice held, almost nothing reached the city by water. Prices spiked. Riots broke out in Southwark. The city didn't starve, but it came close enough that people remembered. We're walking inland now, away from the docks, into the streets that web out from the river like capillaries. Cheapside runs east to west through the heart of the old city, and this is where the food that came off the boats gets broken down into smaller and smaller quantities until it reaches the household. There are no supermarkets. No central distribution hubs, just hundreds of individual shops, stalls, and street hawkers, each one a tiny node in a network so decentralized that no single person understands the whole thing. The bread you're smelling comes from a bakery that's been on this corner for 60 years. The baker buys his flour from a grain merchant near Queenhithe, another wharf a quarter-mile west of here. That merchant buys from barges that came upriver from Kent, where the wheat was grown on farms that have supplied London since before the Normans arrived. It's a chain, but there's no contract, no paperwork. Just centuries of precedent and the knowledge that if the merchant tries to sell bad grain, the baker will find another supplier by tomorrow. What surprised me when I started tracing these systems is how much of it runs on credit. Not money changing hands. Credit. A baker takes flour on Tuesday and pays for it Friday after he's sold the bread. A fishmonger at Billingsgate takes 100 pounds of cod on consignment and settles up at the end of the week. It only works because everyone knows everyone, and reputation is the only currency that matters. Break your word once and you're out. No one will extend credit to a stranger, but if your family has been in the trade for 3 generations, you can run an entire business on promises. We're passing through Leadenhall Market now. This is where the city's butchers congregate, and it's loud in a way that's hard to describe. Not just the voices of vendors shouting prices, but the sound of livestock. Cattle, pigs, sheep, geese, all of them driven into the city on foot from the surrounding countryside. They walk in alive because there's no other way to keep the meat fresh. Slaughter happens here in the market, sometimes in the street. Blood runs into the gutters and down toward the river. In summer, the smell is unbearable. But this is how 500,000 people get meat without refrigeration. The cattle come from as far as Wales, driven in herds along roads that take weeks to traverse. By the time they reach London, they're lean and exhausted, but they're alive. The drover who brought them sells them to a butcher, who slaughters them within hours and sells the cuts by afternoon. There's no storage, no aging. You buy it today or it spoils. So every household in London operates on a daily calculation. What do we need and can we get it before it's gone? But livestock isn't the hardest problem. Water is. You don't think about water until you realize that the Thames, the same river bringing in all the food, is also where the city dumps its waste. Drink from the river and you'll be sick within a day. So London had to build a separate system to bring in clean water, and the scale of it is staggering. There's a structure on the north end of London Bridge that most visitors don't notice. It's called the London Bridge Waterworks, and it's essentially a giant paddle wheel driven by the current of the Thames. The wheel powers pumps that lift river water up into wooden pipes, which then carry it north into the city. It's been operating since the early 1580s, and by the 1660s it's supplying thousands of households. But here's the thing, it's not enough. It was never enough. So there are conduits. Stone channels that carry spring water from hills outside the city, flowing downhill by gravity into public fountains where people line up with buckets every morning. The Great Conduit in Cheapside is one of the oldest. It's been here since the 1200s, fed by springs in Tyburn, miles to the west. By the 1600s, the population has outgrown it, but it's still in use because there's no alternative. People wait an hour sometimes just to fill a bucket. If you're wealthy, you pay a water carrier to do it for you. If you're not, you wait. And if the conduit runs dry, which it does during droughts, you're buying water from vendors who source it from God knows where. Maybe a well, maybe the river. You take the risk because the alternative is thirst. We're climbing now, up from the river valley into the neighborhoods that sprawl beyond the old city walls. This is where the population growth is most visible. Streets that were open fields 30 years ago are now packed with timber frame houses, built so quickly and so cheaply that they lean into each other for support. The city is bursting its boundaries and the food system is struggling to keep up. Out here, there are no markets, no shops. Just street vendors who walk the neighborhoods every day calling out their goods. Fresh milk, hot pies, oysters a penny a dozen. You learn to recognize the voices. The milk seller comes by at 8, the pie man at noon, the oyster seller at dusk. If you miss them, you go without. But what happens when the city grows faster than the vendors can cover? What happens when a neighborhood doubles in size in 5 years and suddenly there aren't enough pie men to go around? The system adapts, but slowly. A new vendor appears, then another, but there's a lag, and during that lag people go hungry, not starving, not dying in the streets, but hungry enough that it shows, enough that crime spikes, enough that the city authorities start to worry. Because here's the thing about feeding 500,000 people without modern logistics: you're always one disruption away from crisis. A bad harvest, a harsh winter, a plague that kills the laborers who unload the boats. Any one of these can tip the balance, and in the 1600s all of them happened, sometimes in the same year. The plague of 1665 is the most famous, but it's not the first. London has been dealing with recurring outbreaks for centuries, and every time the food system nearly breaks. When people start dying in large numbers, the workers flee. The dock workers, the carters, the market vendors. They leave the city to save themselves, and the boats stop getting unloaded. The food piles up on the wharves, or it doesn't arrive at all because the farmers are afraid to come near the city. The price of bread doubles, then triples. Riots start in the East End, the authorities crack down, and then, if the city is lucky, the plague subsides before the whole thing collapses. But London survives. Every time it survives. Not because of some brilliant plan or visionary leadership, but because the system is so decentralized that it can't be killed by a single failure. When one market closes, another opens. When one wharf stops operating, the boats go to the next one. It's resilient by accident, not by design. Resilient because no one is in control. We're standing in Smithfield now, just outside the old city walls. This is the largest livestock market in England, and on market days it's chaos. Thousands of animals, hundreds of drovers, butchers, merchants, all packed into a space that's barely large enough to contain them. The ground is trampled mud mixed with manure. The noise is constant. And somewhere in this mess, the city's meat supply is being negotiated, one animal at a time. What strikes me here is the scale mismatch. You have this medieval market, essentially unchanged for centuries, trying to feed a city that's grown 5 times larger than it was when the market was designed. It should fail. Every day it should fail. And yet it doesn't, because the people who work here have spent their entire lives learning to make it function. They know which drovers are reliable, which butchers pay on time, which animals are worth buying and which are too sick to risk. It's all informal knowledge, passed down through apprenticeships and family connections, and it's the only thing holding the system together. But there's a cost. The cost is that everything is always on the edge. There's no buffer, no safety margin. The city consumes what it produces today, and if tomorrow's supply doesn't arrive, there's nothing in reserve. A few wealthy households have cellars stocked with salted meat and preserved fruit, but the vast majority of Londoners live hand to mouth. Not because they're poor, though many are, but because there's no infrastructure for anything else. And this is the thing I keep coming back to. London in the 1600s isn't just a city that functions without modern logistics. It's a city that has organized its entire existence around the absence of those logistics. The street layouts, the market locations, the timing of the tides, the social networks of credit and reputation. All of it evolved to solve a problem that we've since forgotten was ever a problem. How do you feed 500,000 people when food can't be stored, can't be transported efficiently, and spoils within days? The answer is that you don't solve it. You manage it. Every day. Forever. You build a system so complex and so interwoven that no single person understands it, and you trust that it will hold together because it always has. Until the day it doesn't. I'm standing on London Bridge again, but it's evening now. The boats are still moving. They're always moving. And somewhere downriver, tomorrow's food is already on its way.